So for years now, I've been working in crisis situations. My focus of work was women's rights in emergencies and conflict specifically. Because in every society in this world, women and men have different roles and often unequal access to services, and specifically in humanitarian situation to humanitarian assistance. So therefore it is important to put special effort and emphasis in making sure that everyone has equal access to humanitarian assistance. That is specifically important in conservative communities and very poor conservative communities where gender norms are exploitative to women, in the sense of not allowing them to use public space, not allowing them to work, marrying them very early age, and so on and so forth. So our job is to understand those dynamics and vulnerabilities, and then engage with vulnerable groups, specifically women, in project design, and establish dialogue with them about what exactly do they need, where exactly can we build a refugee camp, for example, so that they can feel safe, and similar examples. We're also trying to establish dialogue with them and enhance not only their, support their vulnerability, but also enhance their leadership from the very onset of the emergencies, so that they can take community roles as service providers, as leaders, as mobilizers. So in my work, we distinguish rights holders as citizens and duty bearers, the one who are responsible, like the governments. So there has to be a legal and normative framework to protect citizens, being women, men, different ages, and different minority groups. The convention is called CEDAW. The convention, that's UN, United Nations Convention on Elimination of all sorts of discrimination against women, which is dated from 1979. And they're responsible to build equality of women and men in everything they do. So the Ukraine is a signatory of the convention, and as other countries, they have to report periodically to the CEDAW committee on what have they done to make sure that there is no discrimination of women in the country. So that includes laws and different politics and policies. And very important, that also includes budgeting. So the country government needs to do what we like to call gender responsive budgeting, so that in redistribution of our money, different needs are met and different priorities as well. Well, I don't like when someone says this is not the time for women's rights, and that's very often that people would say, and that's not true. The resistance to women's rights is because the inequality is normalized, and not only men but also women take it for granted, as if it's something biological, as if it is something that can't be changed. So we learned through history that freedom is not something that is given. You need to fight for freedom. So therefore, women's movement across the world was very instrumental in fighting for women's rights. And over the last few decades, there are more and more men who are feminists and who support advancement of women's rights, because they understand that women's rights are not about women. Women's rights are about democratic society. War always influences gender dynamics because it deeply changes people's lives. So people migrate from one place to another, or they change their roles. War is the time when women, in instances, because men are very vulnerable during war, right? They're the major victim because they're more, in bigger percentage, taken up arms. So in many instances, women then become breadwinners of the family. They take over managing the households. So the war is the situation when women's and girls' rights are affected differently from men and boys. and their life, because they play different roles and they have different access, is differently changed than of men. They're, for example, more vulnerable for from different sort of exploitation and abuse. Often, women are pushed into trading sex for money or access to service because they just need to survive. So those negative coping strategies are not reported, are underreported, but pretty much affect negatively women's lives and make them more vulnerable to what is going on in crisis. However, this is exactly the time when we also try to map different new opportunities to put women's rights on the agenda when it comes to peace talks, peace agreements, the elections that are normally organized after the crisis or after the war is over, so that we use this transition to renegotiate some of the relationships between genders. It's also the opportunity to utilize the potential of women's groups and movements and civil society that is oriented towards promoting gender equality to take more stake in renegotiated new social order after the war. For example, in most of the countries, women gain right to vote after the First and Second World War. My role was, I was a mentor at this conference, and I talked to groups and projects, not only about gender equality, but also about, for example, a methodology about managing volunteers, planning, communication, and different skills they need in their work. For years, I worked with young people, and this is the most inspiring place in the whole world, I think, at the moment. Because all the expertise, youth, innovation, and new ideas in Ukraine and in the world is brought in one place. This is a very, very unique, I've never seen in my life a conference like this, where you have content on so many different levels and interaction among young people on so many different levels.